A wooden bench sat outside a house that hadn't had visitors in 3 years, and still someone sanded it every spring. No one talked about why. No one sat on it, until one rainy night, someone knocked. If stories like this speak to you, quiet ones about kindness, healing, and people finding home again, take a second to like this video and subscribe. We've got a seat saved for you too. The first thing you'd notice was the silence, not the kind you get in cities late at night or in libraries lined with unread books. This was mountain silence, thick, breathing, and full of everything it didn't say. Wind whispered through broken pine limbs. A squirrel rustled dry leaves that hadn't fallen yet, and somewhere behind the trees a roof creaked, like it was remembering a storm from years ago. Daniel Cross didn't mind the silence. He had built his whole life around it. The man moved slowly through his workshop, sleeves rolled, fingers calloused. He was 41, though his shoulders belonged to someone older. Wood shavings clung to his boots. A blade rested on the workbench, half polished, half forgotten. Outside, the sky was the color of wet ash. Fog rolled low, dragging itself along the forest floor like an old dog refusing to lie down. Daniel checked the fire in the stove, added a log, and shut the iron door without a sound. There was a rhythm to this life. A man, a house, a boy who didn't speak much anymore. A routine made of small duties: stack the wood, feed the hens, patch the roof again before the snow came heavy. That morning, Liam hadn't come downstairs. It wasn't unusual. The boy was 14, silent more than he should be, sharp in his own quiet way. Daniel had stopped asking if he was okay. He just made oatmeal, left it on the table, and went back to sanding the bench he'd been pretending to finish for almost a year. It was supposed to be a long bench wide enough for 3. One seat always stayed unfinished. Just a plank. No legs, no purpose. Daniel never said why. The fog pressed hard against the windows. Smoke curled from the chimney, straight and stubborn in the windless cold. He sat by the bench, rubbing the worn edge with a piece of cloth, then stopped. Something in the grain looked different this morning. A split he hadn't noticed before. Small but growing. He sighed, ran his fingers over the crack. Fix it now or let it spread. He didn't fix it. Instead, he stepped outside, mug in hand, warmth rising into the fog. The cabin sat low against the tree line, the color of bark and stone, nearly invisible unless you knew where to look. That was the point. The land used to be part of a ranger station, long abandoned, reclaimed by moss and weather and time. Daniel had bought it cheap after the funeral. No one asked why. No one came to visit. He liked it that way. But lately something had been shifting. Not loud, just small things, like the way Liam watched the sky at night, or the way Daniel caught himself looking at that unfinished seat on the bench. As if someone might still sit there. He took a sip of coffee. Bitter. Burned a little. He didn't mind. Behind him, the workshop smelled of cedar and old iron. A cracked radio sat by the window, antenna bent like a tired arm. Sometimes it picked up a station from across the ridge. Sometimes it didn't. Today it crackled once, then fell silent again. Daniel leaned on the railing. Fog brushed his ankles. Out in the distance, a crow called once, sharp and low. He didn't know, not yet, that this would be the last morning his life moved quietly. He didn't know that in less than a day 2 small hands would knock on his door without knocking at all. But the wind knew. The trees leaned just slightly toward the path no one walked. And somewhere deeper in the woods a cough broke through the stillness. Small, ragged, and far too human. Daniel didn't hear it, not yet. He turned, went back inside, and left the door unlocked without thinking. The storm didn't arrive all at once. It crept in sideways, like it was trying not to wake anyone. By late afternoon, the fog had thickened into something heavier. Rain started in whispers, then turned steady. The kind that seeps into wood, into bone, into thoughts you meant to leave alone. Daniel was walking the southern edge of the property, checking the fence. A branch had fallen pine, freshly snapped, still dripping sap. He bent to move it, then froze. There were tracks in the mud, not deer, not raccoon, rubber, tires. He followed them down the slope, boots slipping on wet leaves, wind curling cold around his collar. The trail bent behind a row of firs, and that's when he saw it. A camper van, rusted along the bottom, one back tire blown, windows fogged from the inside. It didn't belong here. No one ever came this far in. He stood still for a moment, watching. No movement, no sound except the hiss of rain and the distant groan of wind in the trees. He stepped closer. The door of the camper was cracked open barely. Inside it was dark, then a cough, sharp, dry, too quiet to fake. Daniel knocked once. Nothing. He knocked again, louder. A child's voice answered. "Mom?" Then silence. He opened the door slowly. The hinges whined. The air inside smelled of damp wool, old plastic, and something faintly metallic. A woman lay slumped in the front seat, her face pale, lips cracked. A wool scarf was wrapped around her neck. Her eyes fluttered but didn't open. In the back, two girls huddled on a bench seat turned into a bed. One of them, maybe 8, stared back at him. The younger one, barely 5, clutched a stuffed animal, missing one eye. "Who are you?" the older girl asked, not afraid, just tired. "My name's Daniel," he said. "You're not supposed to be here. This land's private." She nodded once, as if that made sense, then added, "Our van broke. We didn't know." Daniel looked at the woman again. Fever, dehydration, maybe worse. "I've got a house up the hill," he said. "It's warm, there's soup. Your mom needs help." The girl didn't answer, but the younger one tugged her sleeve. The older girl nodded again. Daniel stepped back, giving them space. "I can carry her," he said, "but only if you say it's okay." She looked at her mother for a long second, then at him, then nodded just once. It wasn't far less than half a mile, but the path was slick and uneven. He carried the woman in his arms, careful with each step. The girls followed close behind, silent except for the squish of wet shoes on pine needles. Rain traced down his back. The wind pushed against him. He didn't speak. By the time they reached the cabin, the last light had gone. Only the porch lamp glowed dim, golden, almost forgotten. Inside, Liam stood by the kitchen door, wide-eyed. "Get blankets," Daniel said, "and the first aid box, now." Liam moved without a word. Daniel laid the woman on the couch near the stove. Her breathing was shallow. He checked her pulse, wrapped her in wool, started the kettle. The two girls stood by the door, dripping. He looked at them. "Names?" "Ellie," the older one said. "She's Sophie." "You cold?" They nodded. "Bathroom's that way. Towels in the basket. Go." They hesitated, then moved. Liam returned with blankets. He handed one to Daniel, who wrapped it around the woman. "She sick?" "Yeah." "Are they staying?" "For now." Liam didn't say more, just stood watching the woman breathe. Daniel sat by the fire, soaked through, hands wrapped around a mug he hadn't touched. Behind him, the two girls were quiet again, bundled in dry shirts too big for their frames. The house had never held this many people at once, not since the funeral. Not since the silence became a choice. Daniel didn't ask who they were running from, not yet. Outside, the storm finally arrived. The roof shook, the chimney groaned, but inside, the stove crackled and the windows fogged. No one knocked again that night. The woman woke just before dawn. Daniel was already up, sipping from a chipped mug near the stove. He didn't look over when she stirred, just tilted the kettle slightly as if asking a question without words. She blinked, then sat up too fast. Her breath caught in her throat. He heard it. "Easy," he said quietly. "You passed out. You're safe here." She looked around the unfamiliar walls, the fire, the wooden beams overhead. The two girls were asleep together on a pile of quilts in the far corner, curled like small animals. She touched her chest, then her scarf still damp. Where? You were in a camper. Broken down past the ridge, it's still there. She frowned, then nodded slowly. How long? Since yesterday evening. She glanced at the door, then the window, then at him. He set the mug down. I don't ask questions you don't want to answer. You hungry? She hesitated. The girls already ate. Another long pause, then a whisper. Thank you. He only nodded. She didn't give her name. He didn't ask again. Daniel stepped into the small kitchen, ladled oatmeal into a bowl, set it on the table. Steam curled upward in the dim light. No sugar, no milk, just warm. She didn't touch it at first. The girls woke one by one. The older sat up, rubbed her eyes, looked for her mother. The younger mumbled something and buried her face in the blanket. Their mother stood slowly, crossed the room, knelt down. No words, just a long, tired embrace that smelled like smoke and wool and relief. Daniel didn't watch. He went out to split kindling. The cold bit deeper than usual. Or maybe it was the sound of feet moving inside that reminded him how long it had been since this place held more than two people at once. By the time he came back in, the woman had folded the blankets, cleaned the bowls, stacked the cups. She didn't ask. She just did it. Daniel nodded toward the hallway. There's a spare room. Not much, but it's dry. The woman glanced at him, wary. For you and the girls, he added. She hesitated, then finally said, just one night, maybe two. We'll be out of your way. Daniel didn't smile, but something behind his eyes softened. Storm's not done yet, he said. She gave a slow nod. Still no name, still no story. But the girls now sat at the table drawing something with old pencils Liam had left behind. The older one sketched a tree. The younger one tried a circle. It came out square. Liam entered from the back door, cheeks red from the cold. He paused when he saw them. Daniel met his eyes, steady. The boy gave a small nod, barely visible then, walked past the table without a word. Later that morning, as snow began to fall again, the woman stood by the window, arms folded. Daniel handed her a blanket. You can stay, he said. Longer than 2 nights if needed. She didn't answer, just kept looking out at the snow. Then softly, I didn't mean for us to end up here. Daniel didn't ask where here meant. The woods, this cabin, his life. He just replied, no one ever does. They stood like that, silent in the same room but not yet sharing it. Names would come later. For now the only truth they had in common was this. The fire was still burning. The children were still sleeping and neither of them had run yet. The smell of coffee always came first, not the sweet kind from city cafes. This was darker, bitter, honest. Burned slightly at the edges. Liam came down the stairs with that smell in his nose and a knot in his chest. He didn't like waking up to noise, and lately even silence had started to feel crowded. In the kitchen, Daniel was frying something in a cast-iron pan. The woman was already at the table, hands wrapped around a chipped mug. The 2 girls sat across from her, half awake, blinking slowly. Liam paused at the foot of the stairs. Nobody looked at him. Good. He crossed the room, grabbed a spoon and leaned on the counter, waiting, not speaking. Daniel turned the eggs once, twice, plated them. Set 4 dishes on the table, one more than usual. Liam's dish was closest to the edge, like always. He sat. The wood creaked under his weight. The fork felt heavier than usual. The older girl, Ellie, he thought, ate without saying anything. Her little sister pushed pieces of toast around the plate, as if waiting for permission. The woman didn't eat right away. She watched her girls, then glanced toward Liam. Just a flick of the eye, not long enough to mean anything. Daniel sat last, quietly, like he wasn't sure he'd been invited to his own table. It wasn't that the air was tense. It was just full of things not said, of stories still guarded, of strangers too close for comfort. Liam took a bite, chewed, swallowed, then spoke the first words anyone had said that morning. "So, when are you leaving?" His voice wasn't loud, but it hit hard. Daniel's fork stopped midway to his mouth. The girls froze, the woman didn't flinch. She just looked at Liam. "I'm not sure yet," she said calmly. He nodded, as if that was all he needed to hear, then kept eating. No apology, no softening. Daniel let the silence hang a little longer before saying, "Storm's not over. No cars getting out today." The woman nodded. "I understand." Ellie glanced at her mother, then at Liam, then lowered her eyes to her plate. Sophie whispered something inaudible, reached for the butter with both hands and spilled it across the table. The tension broke just slightly. Daniel got up, grabbed a rag, wiped the spill. "No harm done," he muttered. The woman helped gather the crumbs. Liam didn't move. The rest of the meal passed in half-chewed sentences and the clink of forks on ceramic. When it was done, Daniel stood to clear plates. The woman rose too, silently taking 2 dishes from her daughters. "Thank you," she said, to him, to the room. Daniel gave a nod. Liam didn't look up. The woman turned to go, the girls trailing behind her. But before they left the kitchen, she paused. "My name is Mara," she said softly, then added, "in case it matters." Daniel nodded again. "It does." Liam said nothing. They left. The kitchen emptied. Daniel stood at the sink, staring out the small window, watching the fog drift between trees. Behind him, Liam leaned back in his chair and finally spoke again. "She's not staying." Daniel didn't answer. Didn't need to. Some things didn't hold weight until they were tested by time. The snow had softened by midday. Not gone, just less sharp, less punishing. The kind of snow that settled more than it stung, quieting everything beneath a thin, forgiving sheet. Ellie stood at the edge of the woods, her boots barely pressing into the frost. Sophie was a few steps behind, dragging a stick twice her height, drawing crooked lines in the white. Daniel had told them not to go far. "Just where the cabin can still see you," he said. Ellie liked that idea, a house with eyes. She scanned the bare tree, the stubborn green pines, the broken branches fallen after the storm. One of them had a shape beneath it. She stepped closer, careful. It was a nest, cracked in half. Twigs, dry moss, feathers, a few strands of something yellow, maybe yarn. Empty, cold. But once it had held something. She crouched beside it. Sophie came up behind her. "Is it dead?" "No," Ellie said. "Just broken." "Can we fix it?" Ellie looked at her, then at the mess in her hands. "Maybe." Back at the cabin, Daniel had a bench outside, old and half covered with snow. The girls cleared it carefully, setting the nest down like a secret. Sophie ran back inside and returned with scraps, a torn shoelace, a button, a bent paperclip. Ellie added new twigs. She worked slowly, like she was afraid of scaring the memory still clinging to it. Mara watched from the porch but didn't interrupt. Inside the house, Liam sat at the table, sharpening a pencil to nothing. Every now and then, he glanced out the window. Ellie shaped the twigs into a tighter circle. Sophie handed her one of her hair ties. Ellie wove it in. They didn't talk much, but their hands moved with purpose. Daniel came out later with firewood and stopped when he saw them. He didn't ask, didn't comment, just nodded once and went back inside. That night, they placed the nest near the stove, on top of a thick book no one was reading. "It'll stay warm here," Ellie whispered. Sophie nodded. "Do you think the bird will come back?" Ellie shrugged. Birds don't forget where home is, just takes them a while. Upstairs, Liam closed his door, but not all the way. The snow melted slow that afternoon. Water trickled down the cabin roof, tapping a soft rhythm against the rusted gutters. Steam rose from patches of sunlit ground, and the trees dripped drop by drop like they were trying to forget the storm ever happened. Daniel stood near the edge of the driveway, staring at the broken-down camper. Its back tire still sagged in the mud, windows streaked with dirt and old rain. He circled it once, kicked lightly at the flat. No change. He opened the hood. The engine looked like it hadn't been cared for in a long time. Belts frayed, oil dry. One spark plug was cracked. He exhaled through his nose, not in frustration but recognition. Some things just couldn't keep going, not without help. He didn't touch it further. Later he found Mara on the porch, arms wrapped around herself, watching the girls play near the woodpile. "You ever plan on fixing it?" he asked, jerking his head toward the van. She didn't turn. "It got us farther than it should have." "That's not what I asked," she shrugged. "I don't think it wants to be fixed." Daniel folded his arms. The silence between them wasn't cold, but it wasn't warm either. "Won't get far in it now," he said. "I'm not trying to get far." He looked at her then, steady. "You running from something?" She answered too quickly. "No." That didn't sound like no. This time she turned. "Look, I appreciate what you've done, I do, but this isn't permanent. We're not looking to stay." "I never said you were." They stood like that on opposite ends of a sentence neither wanted to finish. Below them, Sophie let out a laugh as she chased Ellie around the trees. It was the kind of sound that didn't care where it was, the kind that made a place feel more like home, even if no one called it that out loud. Daniel nodded toward them. "They're settling in." Mara's voice softened. "Kids adapt faster than we do. That doesn't mean they forget." "No, it doesn't." She looked down at her hands. Her nails were chipped, her knuckles red from the cold. The scarf around her neck had started to unravel at the edge, one thread slowly slipping free. "Back in the city, I had a plan," she said. "It was falling apart, but at least it was mine." "You think being here means giving that up?" "I think being here means... I don't know what to call it." Daniel didn't press. He never did. She added almost to herself, "It's easier if we don't name things." "Why?" "Because then we don't have to lose them." He didn't reply. Behind them, the girls were gathering small stones, building something beside the tree stump. Maybe a wall, maybe a house. It didn't matter. They weren't asking permission to build it. Mara stepped off the porch and walked toward them. Daniel stayed where he was, watching her. Later, when she wasn't looking, he went back to the van, opened the driver's side door, and took out a photo tucked into the visor. It was of her, and the girls, smiling, somewhere warmer. He slid it back in place, shut the door, and left the engine untouched. The upstairs hallway was short, just 3 doors and a window that looked out over the woods. The first door on the left led to Liam's room. Always shut, usually locked from the inside. The second was the bathroom. The third, at the very end of the hall, was the one no one talked about. Mara noticed it on her second day, when Sophie had a nightmare and came crying down the stairs. She'd carried her back up, careful not to wake Ellie, and while passing that hallway corner, she saw the door. It was different. The frame had been painted once, long ago, a pale green, now faded into gray. The handle was older than the others, brass, worn, polished by time, not by use. And it was always locked, not with a padlock, just kept that way. She never asked about it, but she kept noticing it. How Daniel never walked past it unless he had to. How Liam, even in his silence, avoided looking toward it. How no one ever touched the doorknob. On the 4th morning, when Daniel was chopping wood and the girls were outside chasing snowflakes with spoons, Mara stood at the top of the stairs and faced the door. She didn't move closer, just watched it. There was no sound from the other side, no light under the crack. Still, something about it felt full, as if it held a kind of gravity the rest of the house didn't. Later that day, she and Daniel passed each other in the hall. He was carrying a box of tools. She stepped aside to let him through. Her hand brushed the wall near the door, but not on it. He paused. "You don't need to go in there," he said. His voice was calm, flat. "I wasn't going to." He nodded, then added, "It's not locked because of you. It's just been locked." She didn't push, but that night as she folded laundry near the stove, Sophie came over with something small in her hand. "A lady's picture," she said, holding it up. Mara took it gently. It was a worn photograph, edges frayed, colors faded. A woman with dark eyes standing beside Daniel in front of what looked like the same cabin. Her smile was soft, the kind of smile you don't fake. "Where did you find this?" Mara asked. "Under the couch," Sophie said. "She pretty?" Mara nodded, not saying more. She returned the photo after the girls went to bed, tucked it into a drawer near the fireplace. Daniel found it later. Didn't say a word. Just placed it back inside the drawer without looking at it too long. That night, Mara stood again at the bottom of the stairs, hand resting on the railing. The girls were asleep. Liam hadn't come down for dinner. The hallway was dark except for a sliver of moonlight slipping through the window. She looked up. The door at the end of the hall waited in silence. Not inviting, not threatening, just there, still closed, still keeping. The night came quiet. No wind, no snow, just the soft crack of wood burning and the occasional creak of an old beam adjusting to the cold. Liam sat at the kitchen table staring at the last bite of cornbread on his plate. He hadn't touched it in 15 minutes. The room was warm, but he wore his hoodie up, not for the cold, for the space. Daniel moved slowly behind him, rinsing dishes in the sink. Steam rose from the basin, fogging the window. For a while, neither said anything. Then, without looking up, Liam spoke. "Is she leaving?" His voice was quiet, almost bored, but it wasn't a question tossed in the air. It was pointed, careful. Daniel dried his hands, took a moment longer than he needed. "I don't know," he said. Liam nodded, still not touching the bread. "Do you want her to?" Daniel didn't answer, not right away. He poured himself a glass of water, sat across from Liam. The table between them had a long scratch near the center. Made by a dropped tool years ago. They never sanded it out. Daniel leaned back, arms folded. "She said they're just passing through," he said. "That's not what I asked." There it was again, that quiet precision, like Liam was drawing circles around something he couldn't name out loud. Daniel looked at his son, really looked. The boy's face was sharper now, older, not a child anymore, but still fragile in ways he didn't want anyone to see. "You don't like them," Daniel said. Not as accusation, just fact. "I don't know them. That's fair. But Sophie laughs like Mom." Daniel froze. Not entirely, just for a moment. Then he picked up the glass and took a sip he didn't need. Liam continued. "And Ellie, she checks on Sophie the way I used to check on Mom when she couldn't get out of bed." Daniel set the glass down. "They're not replacing anyone," he said quietly. "I know that." The silence between them grew heavier. Not uncomfortable, just full. Then Liam asked again, softer this time. "Is she leaving?" Daniel looked toward the hallway, the room at the end still closed. The girls' laughter faint through the wooden walls. "I think she doesn't know yet," he said. Liam nodded. This time he reached for the cornbread and took a bite, slowly. Daniel watched him, then added, "And I think I don't know what I'd want her to say." They sat like that for a while. A father who'd forgotten how to ask, a son who'd just remembered how. Later that night, Daniel stood alone at the window. Snow had started again. Not heavy, just enough to leave a trace. Behind him, Liam's bedroom door remained open a crack, same as the one in Daniel's heart, just enough to let something in. The power flickered once, then held. Outside, the wind had picked up, pushing clouds low across the hills. The windows shook softly in their frames. Inside, the only light came from the fire, warm and steady, dancing shadows along the cabin walls. The girls sat curled under a quilt on the rug, Sophie half asleep against Ellie's shoulder. Daniel sat in his chair near the fire, a book in his lap he hadn't turned a page of in 20 minutes. Liam leaned on the stair rail, arms crossed, watching without watching. Mara sipped tea, then set the mug down. She looked at the girls, then spoke. Not loudly, not for effect, just enough to be heard. "Once upon a time," she said, "there was a fox who lived in a hollow log. He wasn't red like most foxes. He was gray, the color of ash." Sophie blinked up at her. "Was he old?" the little one asked. "No," Mara said. "He was just tired." Ellie adjusted the blanket. The gray fox had lost his pack a long time ago. Not to wolves, not to traps, just time. Things changed, places grew empty, and one day he found himself alone. So he built a nest out of things no one else wanted. Broken feathers, torn leaves, bits of ribbon from old kites. Sophie smiled. "Did it work?" Mara nodded. "It worked well enough. He was warm, safe, quiet. Until one winter a storm blew through the woods and dropped a baby bird into his nest. Tiny thing. Couldn't fly. Could barely chirp." She paused. "What did he do?" Ellie asked, softer now. "He thought about ignoring it," Mara said. "It wasn't his, and nests weren't meant for sharing." The room had grown still. Even the fire seemed to listen. But he fed it, kept it warm, watched it grow. And soon another bird came, and then a squirrel, and a raccoon with a crooked paw, until one day the gray fox looked around and realized his nest was full again. Sophie yawned, eyes drifting closed. "And then?" Ellie whispered. Mara smiled. "Then he stopped feeling gray." She didn't say the end. She didn't need to. Liam had shifted at the stairs, less rigid now. His arms lowered, his face unreadable but softer somehow. Daniel didn't look at Mara, but he wasn't staring at the book anymore. The girls had both fallen asleep before the fire dimmed. Mara tucked the quilt tighter around them and sat back, her body folding into the worn couch like it belonged there. Daniel stood and stirred the fire with the iron poker. "That story," he said finally. "You read it somewhere?" Mara shook her head. "Made it up last year, when we were in a church basement with no heat." He nodded once. "It's a good one. Thanks." He didn't say more. She didn't press, but something about the air had changed. Lighter, like a window cracked open in a room that had stayed shut too long. The old lamp had sat on the windowsill for years. Brass base, frosted glass. A little dent near the bottom where it had fallen once, back when Liam was small and still chasing light bugs with sticky hands. It hadn't been lit since the funeral, not because it was broken, just because no one reached for it anymore. That morning, the wind was still and the cabin quieter than usual. Daniel had taken Liam to town for supplies. The girls were outside gathering pine cones, turning them into animals with twigs and string. Mara stayed behind to sweep, but she found herself dusting the window frame instead. Then the shelf, then the lamp. It felt wrong. Just leaving it there. Cold, covered in a thin film of time. She picked it up, turned it gently. The wick had dried, the fuel long gone. But the shape of it was still steady, still waiting. She found a bottle of lamp oil in the pantry, topped it off, trimmed the wick, tested the knob. It caught, flicked, then flame, small, blue gold, flickering like breath. She set the lamp back in the window. And for the first time in years, from the outside, the cabin looked like someone was hoping to be found. When Daniel returned, the sun had begun to sink. He carried 2 sacks in one arm and a tired boy in the other. He froze on the porch. The light from the lamp spilled out in a soft glow, not harsh, not asking, just there. Mara opened the door before he could knock. "You lit it," he said, not quite a question. "It still works," she answered, wiping her hands on a towel. He stepped inside, placed the bags on the counter, glanced at the window again. Liam said nothing, just headed upstairs. Daniel stood in the center of the room like something had been moved, but not physically. "That lamp," he said, "used to mean someone was waiting up." Mara looked at him, her voice steady. "Maybe someone still is." He didn't answer, just turned and gently adjusted the flame, barely like the smallest act of control in a world he couldn't always hold. That night, from the woods, the house glowed faint but clear. Not a beacon, but a sign that someone was home. The snow had melted enough for the yard to feel like a space again. Muddy patches dotted the slope behind the cabin. Twigs poked through the half-frozen earth. Everything smelled like thaw-rich, wet, and quiet. Liam sat on the porch steps, whittling a piece of pine into something he hadn't decided yet. His hands moved automatically. The blade made soft, clean sounds satisfying in their predictability. Ellie came around the corner, holding a cardboard box almost as big as she was. She didn't ask if he wanted company, just plopped down beside him with a grunt, set the box between them, and opened the flaps. Inside, rocks, dozens of them, flat, round, chipped, speckled. "Let me guess," Liam said, not looking up. "You've decided to rebuild the mountain." "Nope," Ellie replied. "I'm opening a rock bakery." Liam stopped whittling. She pulled out a smooth gray stone and held it up. "This is a muffin. The bumpy ones are biscuits and the long ones are baguettes." He turned to look at her, half annoyed. "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard." She shrugged. "Stupid things don't have to make sense. That's what makes them fun." He watched her line up a row of baguettes on the porch railing. "They'll be ready in 20 minutes, she said. "Unless it rains, then they're ruined and I quit forever." Liam looked down at his wood, the half-formed object in his hands. It didn't look like anything anymore. "You're weird," he muttered. Ellie smiled. "You're not the first person to say that. You probably won't be the last." She pulled out a rock with a red streak and held it up like a jewel. "This one's the burnt cookie. Every bakery has one. You hide it in the back so customers feel sorry for it." Liam huffed through his nose, not a laugh, not yet. She set the cookie aside carefully. Then, almost to herself, she said, "My dad used to do stuff like this before he got too tired." Liam didn't ask more. She didn't explain. Instead, she picked up another rock and licked it. Liam blinked. "What the hell are you doing?" "Taste testing," she said, dead serious. And just like that, it broke. Not a burst, not a loud laugh. Just a sharp, involuntary breath through his nose, followed by a sound he hadn't made in over 3 years. It startled him more than it did her. Ellie looked over, eyebrows raised. "Was that a laugh?" "No," she grinned. "Pretty sure it was. Was not." "Do it again." He shook his head, half smiling now. "No." But the corner of his mouth didn't fall back. Not all the way. She nudged him with her elbow. "If you laugh 2 more times, I'll give you half ownership of the bakery, but you have to help fire the burnt cookie." Liam rolled his eyes. "You're insane." "Exactly," she said. "That's why I'm in charge." They sat there for a while, her arranging rocks into orders, him pretending not to be amused. The wind moved through the trees like it had heard the noise and didn't want to scare it off. Inside, Daniel saw them through the window, saw Liam's shoulders looser, his eyes brighter, his mouth not quite closed. And Daniel, without knowing why, walked over to the stove, turned the flame just a bit higher under the kettle, as if the house, like Liam, was slowly remembering what warmth felt like. The sun was out, soft but honest, the kind that didn't promise warmth, just clarity. Daniel was in the workshop behind the cabin. The place smelled like sawdust, old varnish, and time. The radio in the corner crackled static. He didn't bother fixing it. On the bench in front of him, 3 wide planks of maple, sanded down, edges smooth, a seat, a backrest, legs cut square. He was building a bench. Not just any bench, a 3-seater. He hadn't made anything bigger than a pair of stools in years. Even the dining table, once meant for 6, now held only 2 chairs pulled close together. But something had shifted, quietly, without asking. And this bench, it had started as something to do with his hands. But it became something else, an idea he hadn't spoken out loud. He ran a hand across the backrest, warm from the sun. The grain was good, clean, it would hold. He started assembling. Dowels in, glue steady, no rush. In his mind, he saw it on the porch. Ellie in the middle, Sophie leaning into her, and he stopped. He'd left space for someone on the left, someone who might not be there long enough to sit. The thought stuck in his chest like a splinter. He kept working. Screws in. Wood groaned slightly under the pressure. He wiped sweat from his brow, stared at the finished frame. 3 places, 3 silent invitations. He stepped back, arms crossed, weight shifting. Then he picked up the drill again and began removing each screw. One by one. He didn't stop until the pieces were back where they started, separate. Flat, as if they had never belonged to each other at all. That night, he sat on the porch alone. The planks leaned against the wall beside him, stripped of meaning. The girls were inside playing cards. Mara was folding laundry in the dim kitchen light. Liam had gone to bed early. Daniel stared out toward the trees. His hands smelled like glue and dust and hesitation. He wasn't sure what hurt more, the fact that he'd built it, or the fact that he'd taken it apart. The envelope was thin, white, government standard. No return address, just a line of print in the top left corner. Social Services, District 12A. Mara found it on the porch step that morning. Someone must have left it while they were out gathering firewood. No one knocked. She stood there, coat half zipped, the cold biting her bare fingers as she turned it over once, twice, then opened it. Inside, a printed letter. 2 pages. Clipped neatly. She read the first line, then the second, and then stopped breathing for a moment. The girls were inside, drawing by the fire. Sophie was showing Liam how to make paper frogs. Daniel was in the shed. Mara folded the letter and tucked it into the inside pocket of her jacket. For the next hour, she moved like a ghost, rehearsing how to stay solid, folding clothes, washing dishes that didn't need it, picking up shoes and setting them back down again. Daniel came in around noon carrying kindling and smelling like pine. "Snow's holding off today," he said almost casually. She gave a small nod. "That's good." He paused. Something in her tone, flat but not empty, caught his ear. "You okay?" She didn't answer at first, then too fast. "Just tired." He didn't press, but she knew he noticed. That night, after the girls had gone to bed, she stepped out onto the porch and took out the letter again. The print was clear. A shelter space had opened up downstate, with schooling, temporary work placement, subsidized housing in 6 weeks assuming evaluation cleared, no more driving around in a broken camper, no more relying on strangers in the woods. It was, by most definitions, a way forward. The catch, she'd have to leave by Friday. She folded the paper again, slower this time. Inside, Daniel sat alone at the table, fixing a loose hinge on a drawer. Mara walked in quietly. For a moment, she just stood there. I got a letter, she said. He didn't look up. From who? Social services, they found us a place. His hands paused, then resumed. Is it safe? Yes. For the girls? Yes. He set the hinge down, met her eyes. And for you? She didn't answer. He nodded like he understood, then looked away. She added, They want us to leave by Friday. He exhaled slowly. That's soon. I know. Outside, wind brushed across the walls like something too polite to knock. Liam heard it all from the stairs. He didn't move, didn't speak. But later, when he came down to get water, he walked past Mara without a word and slipped something into her coat pocket. She found it after he went back upstairs. It was one of Ellie's rock cookies, burnt, misshapen, wrapped in tissue, on it written in shaky pencil. Not all things that look broken are done yet. She held it in her palm for a long time, as if it were heavier than it looked. The clock on the mantel clicked past 1 o'clock a.m. The house was quiet, too quiet for sleep. Mara sat at the table with a folded city map spread out in front of her. Lines and blocks and faded names under fluorescent kitchen light. She traced them with one finger like they might tell her how to feel. She'd lived near that city once. Years ago, long enough to forget the bus routes, short enough to still remember how the air there smelled like metal and burnt coffee. The shelter was somewhere near the edge District 8, far from downtown. But buses ran, schools weren't bad, it was stable. That word again, stable, like a hospital bed, like a paycheck that never grew, like a heart that never risked beating faster. She stared at the circle she'd drawn around the shelter's location, then at the one she'd drawn around the school. Then she picked up the pen and stopped herself from drawing a third circle around this place, this cabin, these woods, this not quite home. Upstairs, Daniel lay on his back, eyes open. He didn't hear anything but the house breathing around him. Liam's door creaked once, then closed again, softly. Daniel didn't move. He was thinking about the bench he didn't finish, and the lamp Mara lit, and how sometimes it felt like healing wasn't something you do. It was something that happens when you stop resisting. Downstairs, Mara refolded the map, slowly, methodically. She set it aside, then reached into her coat pocket. The rock cookie, still there, wrapped in tissue. She unwrapped it, placed it on the table. It looked like nothing, but it was something. Something someone gave without asking why. She looked out the window. The lamp was still lit, flickering faintly in the glass. Outside, frost crawled along the corners. Inside, she didn't move, didn't sleep, didn't cry. But if someone had been watching closely, they might have seen her shoulders once, then fall, like letting go of a weight she wasn't sure she'd been carrying. In the next room, Sophie turned in her sleep, murmuring something about pancakes and birds. Ellie opened her eyes, sat up, then for no reason at all, walked out quietly and stood in the hallway, not to speak, just to listen, to the night that was full not of noise but of choices too large to name. The morning came late. Clouds hung low, pulling the sky down like a curtain not quite opened. Light slipped in sideways, brushing the floor with silver. Daniel was already in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a mug he hadn't drunk from. The coffee had gone cold. He heard her footsteps before he saw her. Mara entered quietly, wearing Liam's old hoodie over her flannel. Her hair was tied back like she hadn't really planned to get out of bed, but something made her rise anyway. Daniel didn't look up. She poured herself some coffee, took a sip, then leaned against the counter. Neither spoke for a moment. Then he asked, "You made a decision?" She didn't respond right away, just traced the rim of her mug with her finger. "They said Friday," she said. "I didn't say yes, not yet." Daniel nodded. "But you're going," he said, not as a question. "I didn't say that either." So you're staying? Mara looked at him then, really looked. I don't know. He met her eyes. Yes, you do. She looked away, out the window, at the trees that were slowly waking up after the storm. I know what would be smart, she said. What's stable, what's safe. And I'm tired of choosing between what's right and what's real. Daniel placed the mug down gently, as if noise might break the space between them. You don't owe us anything, he said. I know. You don't need to feel guilty for leaving. I'm not guilty. He raised an eyebrow. She smiled, bitter and soft. Okay, maybe a little. He leaned forward, forearms on the table. Tell me the truth, Mara. If it was just you, no girls, no letters, what would you want? She opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again, but no sound came. Finally, she said, I don't know who I am without the running. Daniel let that hang, then answered, maybe that's the part you get to find out here. She swallowed hard, looked away again. I don't want to make this harder than it already is. You're not. I might. Daniel stood up, walked past her, paused at the door. When you're ready, he said, you can tell me what you really want. And then he left, leaving behind 2 half-empty mugs and a conversation that wasn't over, but had finally begun. Ellie wasn't snooping. She didn't need to. Kids like her quiet ones, the kind who always make sure their sister eats first and never ask for the last cookie-feel things before they're said. That morning, she noticed the folded map on the table. Same one from the van's glove box, but now it was marked. A circle, a date, a note in her mother's handwriting. Free, bus station, 7:40 a.m. Ellie didn't ask. She just stared at it, long enough for the clock to click forward 2 minutes. Then she folded it again and placed it exactly where it had been. She didn't tell Sophie. Didn't want to break the game they'd been playing since they got here, that maybe this wasn't temporary. That maybe this was real. Instead, she went outside with her scarf half tied and walked to the edge of the woods. There, beneath the same pine tree where she'd found the broken nest weeks ago, Ellie began to collect things again. Not random things, not rocks or feathers, pieces of this place. One bark chip from the porch step, a rusted washer from the shed floor, a bit of thread from the quilt they always used by the fire. She placed them carefully in a tin box she'd taken from the kitchen drawer, the one that used to hold tea bags no one drank. She didn't call it a memory box. She didn't call it anything. Just kept filling it until it felt full enough to hurt. That evening, while Mara folded laundry, Ellie quietly slipped the tin into her backpack. Not hidden, not explained, just packed. Later, when Sophie asked why she wasn't playing cards like usual, Ellie just shrugged. Tired, she said. But her eyes didn't look tired. They looked like someone already grieving something not yet gone. Daniel noticed it too. She passed him in the hallway on her way upstairs. He gave her a small smile. She didn't return it, only looked up at him with those wide, brown eyes that said, I know, even if no one told me. He didn't stop her, didn't call after her. He just stood there holding a cup of tea that had long gone cold and wondered how children could be so still while breaking. That night, Ellie crawled into bed beside Sophie. Her sister was half asleep, whispering about pancakes and ponies and something about a bakery for mice. Ellie kissed her on the forehead, pulled the blanket tight around both of them and whispered one thing before sleep took her. We'll remember this, even if we go. Mara folded quietly, jeans, socks, the girls' pajamas, all rolled tight and tucked into the duffel bag like soldiers retreating in orderly lines. She moved without sound, without hesitation. The room around her still smelled like wood smoke and lemon soap. Last to be packed was her scarf. Wool, dark gray, frayed at the ends. It had unraveled a little more since she arrived. One thread now hung longer than the rest, curled like it had lost its way. She held it in her hands, rubbed the fabric once between her fingers, then set it down on the armrest of the couch. Not in the bag, just there, left. Daniel found it an hour later. She was outside checking the camper tires again. Not that it mattered, she'd already said they were catching the bus instead. He stood in the doorway holding the scarf. Didn't say anything. She turned, brushing hair from her face. "It's too warm for it now," she offered. He looked at her, then at the scarf, then back again. "You think this is something you leave behind?" he asked, not angry, just tired. "It's just a scarf." "No, it's not." He stepped closer, held it up, not like a challenge, but like a question. "This was the first thing you wore when you stepped through my door," he said. "You were shaking, wet, holding one kid and dragging the other. You wrapped it around both of them before you ever thought to cover yourself." Mara didn't answer. "I've seen this scarf drying on my stove, wrapped around Sophie when she fell asleep, hanging on a chair next to the fire. That thread," he pointed to the loose one, "that came loose the same day Ellie laughed out loud for the first time." Her voice came low. "I didn't want to take more than I gave." "You didn't." She looked at him. "I mean it," he said. "You didn't take anything that wasn't offered." She nodded, swallowing hard. Daniel held the scarf out. She didn't take it. He stepped forward, gently tucked it back into her hands. Then he said, quiet and plain, "Don't leave it like that. If you're going, fine, but don't pretend this didn't matter." Her eyes filled but didn't fall. She nodded once, folded the scarf slowly. This time she placed it carefully in her bag on top. That night, long after the girls had fallen asleep and the fire had burned low, Daniel stood in the doorway again. He stared at the empty couch. The thread from the scarf, just one strand, still lay there. It must have come loose again. He picked it up, twirled it around his finger, then, without really thinking, tucked it in the drawer beside the old photo of his wife. Not to compare, not to replace, just to say, this happened. It was real. Rain came soft, not the kind that makes you run for cover, the kind that seeps in before you notice. Soaks your sleeves. Dulls the sound of the world until everything feels wrapped in cotton. It hadn't rained in weeks. Of course it came this morning. Mara zipped her coat halfway. The girls were already dressed, bags packed. Sophie was bouncing on the balls of her feet, still half asleep but excited. Ellie stood still, clutching the tin box under one arm, her eyes unreadable. Daniel had made coffee, poured it into 2 mismatched travel mugs, set one on the counter without a word. Mara nodded, grateful. He didn't try to say more. Neither did she. The camper had been sitting quiet for days. Its tires sagged just slightly, like it was bracing itself. Daniel helped load the bags. Didn't offer advice, didn't mention the roads. Mara climbed into the driver's seat, turned the key, click, nothing. She tried again, click, a sputter, then silence. She exhaled, waited, then tried once more, click, that was it. Daniel walked around from the porch. "Want me to take a look?" She didn't look at him. "No," she said softly. "It's okay." He paused. "You sure?" "I'm sure." He stepped back, hands in pockets, rain collecting in his hair. Ellie climbed into the front passenger seat. Sophie crawled into the back, already asking if they could play the muffin rock game when they stopped for gas. Mara sat still, one hand on the wheel, one on the key. But she didn't turn it again. Rain tapped on the windshield in uneven rhythms. Minutes passed. Daniel didn't go back inside. He stood there, waiting, not rushing, not hoping, just present. Inside the camper, Ellie unbuckled herself, reached forward, turned the key back to off. Mara looked at her, just once. Ellie said, "It doesn't want to go." Mara gave a soft, tired smile. "Maybe not," she whispered. She looked out at the porch light, still on, at the scarf in the rearview mirror looped gently around the headrest, at the house behind her that somehow, without her asking, had started to feel like the center of a circle she didn't know she'd drawn. She exhaled, then opened the door, stepped into the rain, walked slowly to Daniel and said the one sentence that didn't need an answer. "Let's not fix it today." The morning after the rain was full of quiet sun, the kind that filtered through the trees in streaks, touching the floor like a soft hand. No urgency, no announcement, just presence. Mara stood at the stove, sleeves rolled up, whisking eggs with a steady rhythm. Her hair was pulled back loosely, a few wisps framing her cheekbones. She looked like someone trying something for the first time and not saying it out loud. Daniel was slicing apples beside her. Sophie had dragged a stool from the hallway to supervise, while Ellie stood by the sink, rinsing potatoes like she'd done it forever. No one mentioned the camper. No one said stay or home or decision. They just cooked together. Daniel stepped out to grab fresh herbs from the planter box and came back with a surprise, a bench. Finished, sanded, 3 seats wide, maple wood glowing faintly in the light. He set it just outside the kitchen doorway where the sun hit for exactly 20 minutes each morning. Without a word, he adjusted the placement, then patted the top once and walked away. Mara noticed, didn't comment, but Ellie did. "Is that new?" Daniel didn't look back. "Been waiting to be finished." She stared at the bench, then at her mom. Mara didn't nod, but she also didn't look away. They ate late breakfast around the main table, plates overlapping and forks moving like conversations. Messy but warm. Halfway through, Sophie spilled syrup on Daniel's shirt. He didn't flinch. Just handed her a napkin and told her she'd been promoted to official pancake pourer. She took the title seriously. Ellie told Liam a story about a pigeon she saw fight a sandwich in the city once. He laughed, not loudly but naturally. Mara poured more coffee for Daniel. He topped off her cup without asking. It was a small meal, but it filled the house more than any holiday ever had. After the dishes were done, the girls pulled Mara outside where Sophie insisted the bench needed a test drive. Daniel watched from the porch as the 3 of them sat, Sophie in the middle, feet dangling, Ellie on the left, arms folded like always, Mara on the right, hands still damp from drying dishes. They fit, not perfectly, but like they belonged. Daniel stepped down slowly and sat on the porch step, letting the image soak in. The bench, the sun, the stillness that wasn't empty. Then Liam came out. He didn't say anything, just walked over and quietly sat next to Daniel. 2 steps behind the rest, but present, watching, allowing. No one said, "This is home." No one had to, because for the first time no one was thinking about leaving. And that, maybe, was the loudest thing in the room. The room hadn't been touched in nearly 3 years, not fully. Daniel had dusted the window once, changed the sheets once, but everything else, the bookshelf, the half-finished knitting basket, the cracked mug with her name on it, remained where she'd left them. He opened the door slowly this time. The air inside was still, not stale, not cold, just paused. The late sun fell across the bed in strips. He didn't know what made him go to the dresser that day. Maybe it was the smell of eggs lingering in the hallway, or the sight of Mara laughing with Ellie on the porch, or just the weight in his chest that hadn't fully lifted. He opened the bottom drawer. Inside, old receipts, a broken watch, and a small envelope, yellowed at the corners, with his name on it. Daniel. No stamp, just her handwriting, slanted, neat, unmistakable. He sat on the edge of the bed, took a long breath, then opened it. Daniel, if you're reading this, it means I didn't have the guts to give it to you when I should have. That sounds like me. Quiet when I should speak, but I needed to write this somewhere, just in case. I know you. I know how hard it will be for you to let someone else in, especially after me. Not because you're stuck, but because you're kind. You think loving again means betraying what we had. It doesn't. You're still here. That means you're meant to keep going. And maybe someone will come along, not to replace, not to fix, but just to sit beside you in whatever this next part is. If she's kind to Liam, if she laughs with her whole face, if she wipes the counters the wrong way but hums when she does it. Let her stay. You don't need my permission, but I'm giving it anyway. Love, E. Daniel sat there a long time, the letter in his hands, his name in her handwriting, a door in his chest that had refused to move, quietly unlocking. He folded the paper gently and placed it back in the envelope, then walked downstairs. He found Mara in the kitchen, drying a plate. She looked up. Something in his eyes made her still. He didn't speak, just stepped closer and set the letter still sealed on the counter. She glanced down, then up again. He nodded once, small, and walked out to the porch. She didn't open it, didn't need to, because some letters aren't meant to be read by everyone, but the message inside, somehow she already knew. It was Sophie who saw it first. The nest had been sitting crooked in the same low branch since the storm. Weeks ago, she and Ellie had helped Daniel prop it back up with twine and an old glove. They'd checked it every few days. Empty. Always empty. Until now. Sophie had wandered out after breakfast, still barefoot, holding a biscuit in one hand and dragging a piece of string in the other. She didn't mean to check the nest, her feet just took her there. She looked up and froze. Inside, nestled deep in the twigs and pine needles movement, tiny, rust-colored, breathing. She held her breath, then Flutter, a bird, small, sharp-beaked, watching her from the edge of the nest like a sentinel. Sophie dropped the biscuit, then turned and ran. "Mom! Mom!" Mara came out onto the porch, drying her hands. What? What is it?" Sophie pointed, wide-eyed. "It's back! The bird! She came back!" Mara blinked. "To the nest?" Sophie nodded fiercely. "She's in there! I saw her!" Daniel came out too, followed by Ellie and Liam. The whole household moved toward the tree like it was a ceremony. Sure enough, tucked in the green was the mother bird, still, calm, home. Daniel squinted. She must have been watching, waiting for it to feel safe again. Ellie whispered, "Or maybe she just decided it was still hers." Mara didn't say anything. She just watched the bird watch them. Later that afternoon, Sophie drew a picture of the nest, big, messy, full of crooked lines and soft scribbles. She handed it to Daniel. "This is our porch," she explained, "and this is me, and this is the bird. I think she likes us." Daniel smiled. "I think so too." Ellie added, "She probably thinks it's okay to stay now." Daniel looked at Mara, who was folding a clean towel nearby. Their eyes met. Something passed between them. Not a decision, but a peace. That night before bed, Sophie stood at the window. The lamp was still on. The nest was still full. And in the quiet just before sleep, she whispered, "I'm glad she came back." The house looked the same. Wood siding still weathered, the porch still slightly crooked, the same wind chimes rusted, off-key perfect. But everything had changed. Inside, books lined the walls now, not alphabetized, not even shelved straight, just present. Read, reread, loved. The dining table had 6 chairs again. And the bench, that 3-seater maple bench, had been moved under the east window where morning sun landed first. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and pencil shavings. Outside, Liam stood by the tree line with a group of kids from the Valley School. Backpacks, binoculars, crumpled paper maps. He was explaining something about mushrooms and tree rings, hands moving slowly, clearly, his voice low but confident. Ellie stood next to him, pretending not to be impressed. He caught her looking. "Still think I'm boring?" he asked, half a grin. Ellie shrugged. "Just moderately." Then ran ahead with Sophie, who shouted, "Race you to the bridge!" On the porch, Mara adjusted a folding table. A stack of spelling papers fluttered beside a tray of oatmeal cookies. Daniel came out with 2 mugs. She took one. "Your third graders behaving?" he asked. She smirked. "Barely, but they use big words when they complain, so I'm proud." He handed her a pencil. "You've got jam on your nose." She wiped it. Missed. He reached over and did it for her. Neither commented. The porch light had stayed on, all year, even through summer heat and autumn storms. Not because someone forgot, because someone remembered. Liam returned from the woods, dirt on his jeans, pine needles in his sleeves. He handed Daniel a tiny blue feather. "From Sophie," he said. "She says you're a rare species." Daniel nodded solemnly. "Tell her I'm endangered." The kids dumped their finds on the bench rocks, twigs, one lost mitten. Mara laughed. Daniel stepped back, took in the noise, the clutter, the weight of nothing missing, and said the one thing he hadn't said in years: "I'll make lunch." Late afternoon sun spilled across the porch. That kind of light that makes you pause, just long enough to notice how long you've been happy without naming it. The wind was still. The woods hushed. The kids were off gathering something or arguing about nothing either way. The kind of peace that doesn't ask for silence. Daniel sat on the bench, middle seat, not by accident. He leaned back, the maple wood warmed by the sun. One arm stretched across the backrest, a mug in the other hand. His boots tapped gently against the floorboards, almost keeping time with the wind chimes. The porch smelled like soap, pine, and a hint of something baking. He closed his eyes, and then felt weight. On his right, Mara sat down. No announcement, no invitation, just a kind of ease that said, "I'm not going anywhere." She pulled her knees up slightly, blanket over her lap, rested her shoulder into his without a word. He smiled without opening his eyes, then soft footsteps. Ellie came next, sat on Mara's side, her sketchbook in hand, half filled with trees and birds and someone's boots she'd drawn from memory. She didn't speak, just leaned. Then Sophie came, hands sticky from something sweet, face sun-pink and pleased with herself. She plopped herself down directly onto Daniel's other side, half on his leg. "Am I heavy?" she asked. "Yes," he said. She grinned, stayed put. Finally, Liam came out, stood on the porch step watching them. Daniel patted his knee. "We got room." Liam hesitated, then nodded once and sat on the edge of the bench, shoulder to shoulder with his dad. No one spoke for a while, just breeze, wood creak, distant laughter from the trees. Then Sophie said, "We need a name." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For us." Mara chuckled. "Like a team?" "Like a group," Sophie said, serious. "Or a flock." Ellie looked up from her sketchbook. "Maybe we don't need a name. Maybe we just are." Liam nodded. "Yeah, like the nest. It didn't have a name, but it was still home," Mara said quietly. Daniel looked around, 5 people, 1 bench, no space between. He looked out at the woods, then at the light inside the house. The porch lamp flickering softly, not because it had to, but because it still wanted to. He didn't say anything grand, didn't offer a speech, just exhaled, long and full, and thought, the bench is full, finally. That night, long after the porch emptied and the stars came out one by one, the wind passed gently through the trees, touching everything once. The light on the porch stayed on. The nest remained whole, and for the first time in a long time, no one was waiting for someone to leave, because they were all already home. The story ended where it began, not with a farewell, but with a feather. On Sunday afternoon, the family sat under the old pine, same one where the nest had once been tied with twine and an old glove. Mara opened the book, a children's story, the one she had started reading to Sophie that first stormy night and never finished. Now, a year later, the pages were dog-eared, the cover soft from hands and time. She cleared her throat and read, "So the little bird flew and flew until the wind told her, 'You may leave now, but not because you're lost, because you found where to begin again.'" Sophie smiled. Ellie closed her eyes. Liam pulled his hoodie tighter, pretending the breeze wasn't making his throat feel weird. Daniel said nothing, but his hand rested gently over Mara's knee. They all looked up. The nest was still there, but empty, and just above it, high, steady, a bird in flight, not frantic, not fleeing, just moving forward. Later that evening, while the kids picked apples and argued over jam flavors, Daniel opened the shed, pulled out the plank. It had been leaning against the wall for months, unfinished, untouched, until now. He set it on the porch, took out the carving tool, and pressed down slow and deep. Each letter clean, deliberate. When it was done, he stepped back. Read the words aloud, not for show, but as a kind of sealing. The long bench est, not by date, but by choice. He mounted it under the window where the bench sat, sanded smooth, ready. That night, Ellie placed the final drawing in her sketchbook. A nest, empty. Above it, 5 small birds, not flying away, flying together. Inside, Sophie curled up under the quilt and whispered to no one in particular, "Maybe that's how you know it's home, when it's okay to fly, but you don't really want to." Mara kissed her forehead. Daniel turned off the kitchen light, left the porch lamp glowing, still, always. Outside, the wind carried nothing urgent, just stories, and maybe if you listened hard enough, wings. The porch light stayed on. The bench was full, and for the first time in a long time, no one was waiting for someone to leave. They were all already home. If this story sat quietly with you, the way some stories do, feel free to like and subscribe. There's always room on the bench.